What's happening, ladies and gents? Welcome to episode number 179 of the Ready for Anything podcast. Today we've got first returning guest, I think, on the podcast between the KDH and Ready for Anything. It's Colin Campbell. Colin's actually a podcaster as well, and actually had him on episode 20 of the Ready for Anything, the KDH podcast at the time. So I was listening to it back on the way here on the car before, and my God, I was cringing at the way I was speaking, what I was saying, what I was doing. But this is all part of life and growing and the things that you do. But really interested to get Colin on and just talk all things success, growing, and essentially just like entrepreneurship, taking action, and essentially achieving a lot in your life. So it's going to be a very, very interesting episode. I think, like, obviously I was just doing a bit of an intro there for you coming on, mate. Like, obviously it's been if you could get everyone up to speed, if they'd listened to episode 20 of the Ready for Anything podcast, KDH podcast at the time, we're now on episode 179. Obviously you've came a long way, we've came a long way. Like, get everyone up to speed about where you're at, what's happening in your life, who you are. If you could give everyone a quick note and a quick recap of you.
Of course, the whole caption to that last one was the office athlete, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we were talking about excelling within my corporate career, and then the other things I turned my hand to in terms of content creation with the podcast, my physique, my training. I think another strand to that I've definitely worked on over the last few years has been my social and my family relationships as well, which were always strong, but I've been thinking more and more about peak performance across all these areas and making sure none of these things fall off. And maybe we can talk about that as this goes, in terms of the danger of focusing too narrowly on some of the things that you care about and not remembering these other areas as well. But for me, in terms of like big headlines, since October 2020, I moved career from the insurance industry into the furniture industry. And that was primarily driven by applying my sales skills, which I'd honed for coming up for a decade now, making me feel quite old, in an area that was more fiscally rewarding and had greater headroom. Again, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but you, when we last spoke, were one-to-one coaching and boot camps.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the scale and the vehicle that you're in, it's far more scalable because it's online. It's primarily driven by your ability to deal with that capacity rather than the amount of time that you have. So the same thing was the same for me, where I moved from the insurance sector where, yes, I could bring in high numbers of revenue to the business, but if I moved into another industry, I could bring in 10x that revenue. So of course, with that, you can be paid fiscally far more as a percentage of your commission, of your base. And I could get more excited about the size of deals that I was getting to work on, and I could apply the skill set. So the vehicle is everything, whether that's as a one-to-one coach and a bootcamp coach to an online coach, or whether that's working in a particular industry where you can sell products for a particular value or sell them for another value, or whether that's just the area of or country that you live in as well. There's lots of people fleeing the UK at the moment in terms of a talent drain, where people are maybe feeling that the country isn't stimulating them in the way that they want to be, or they're punishing them with punitive taxes, whatever else as well. So the vehicle for me was everything in terms of moving from one sector to another. And of course, alongside that, Canberra Conversations, the podcast, has grown into a bit of a behemoth as well on a global scale, which has been amazing. And all the different conversations I've got to have and all the different development that's done for myself, but also the thousands of people that get to listen to it as well and get that kind of ripple effect of positive energy and insights.
No, mate, that's very well practiced, very well versed coming into here, man. What an intro. But I think that the biggest thing for anyone listening from that, and like even for me, just a genuine question, not something I've even prepped for this, but like with pushing that much in your career, then also actually pursuing something else like the podcast. I know how, I mean, you spoke about this ages ago, because I said when I started there was a point with the KDH podcast when I first started it, where I started to kind of stop getting guests on. I kind of lost the buzz with it, and I didn't really have that sort of higher purpose and direction with it. Then I kind of fell away a little bit. Then I reintroduced it and almost kind of restarted
revamped
it. Yeah, revamped it. Yeah, there was like a point for like a few months. How have you been able to maintain, like, just not missing in two huge aspects of your life, being able to be focused on that? Like, what's been the big sort of part behind that?
I say no to lots of things.
Yeah.
One of the last things we spoke about in the podcast was sobriety. I continue to be somebody that drinks very, very infrequently. I think since we last spoke, I've probably drank 6-7 times at most, and all of those have been for particular occasions, whether that's been a boat party in Dubai or my birthday or New Year's Eve. It's been a handful of occasions, so I have a lot of time that a lot of other people have as well, but they maybe spend it vibrating at a lower frequency, feeling lower energy, feeling more tired, feeling more sluggish. I also have identified two areas that I really care about. So when the going gets tough, my why is big enough. That's a whole Nietzsche thing. If your why is big enough, you can bear anyhow. I really believe that. So when I'm maybe had a guest cancel, or I've had the file corrupt on me and my upload still needs to go up on Sunday morning as it has done for 4 years straight, I'll do the work to go and find that other guest and get the recording, or I'll bang out a solo podcast that's got questions from the listeners from Instagram or email list, because I want to. I really, really want to, and I'm willing to do it. In the same way in my sales career, there's times that it feels like work when I'm maybe filling out the CRM system, or I'm doing the admin on the Excel spreadsheet, or I'm going back and playing around with a quote to make sure it's got the right colour of fabric on the furniture. That feels like work. But what doesn't feel like work is when I'm doing the prospecting, when I'm doing the outbound calls, when I'm doing the meetings with the prospect for the first time, when I'm doing the site visit, or when I'm getting the PO through or the order through for £19,000 or £190,000, and I'm like, wow, this feels great. So I'm really applying myself in areas that they sometimes feel like work to me on occasion, but a lot of the time they don't feel as hard as they might be for some other people. So I found my lane, I found my niche.
Yeah, there was something I was going to come on to. I hadn't actually wrote it down, but the sobriety thing's a big one as well. I've actually just done, it was 6 months.
I saw that
2 days ago, and that was what I set out to do at the end of last year. I got to a point where it was my birthday. I'd been in Dubai, we'd been in Bali, I had a surprise party, and I think in the space of like a month I had like 8 or 9 times that I did a drink, and I was like, this is getting a lot right now, and I'd always wanted to do it. And I think I actually spoke to you on the podcast about wanting to do it at one point, but see, being brutally honest, it wasn't enough of a priority, and it wasn't until I actually went, I actually want to do this. But I can relate so much to that, because I wrote a post about it the other day about actually saying like, do I feel different? And I can hand on heart say no, because it wasn't at a problematic point. And I think it's levels to it when folk go into it, but I can resonate so much with the output part, because like, you have to almost like hypothetically think about like what was it you kind of used as example there, like you're not as low frequency all the time. So like one of the things I've really noticed is like creativity is like a big part of like my life. Like I need to be creating content, coming up with ideas, keeping clients on their toes, keeping them excited. And for me, it's like, it's probably the thing that I've really massively capitalized on, is actually something that wasn't there, and I've actually just increased output, productivity, efficiency. But it's probably made me be a lot more selective as well. You said yourself, it's probably a handful of times even between our last podcast like 3.5 years ago that you've done it, but I've even came off the back end of that and been way more selective with when I will drink, and that was something that I'd never done. And even last weekend, like, I could have had a beer to celebrate the other night, and I was just like, nah, and I had an alcohol-free beer. Do you know what I mean? Like that'll be a big part of my life now. And it's funny, like the more you go through different seasons and cycles, that you mature, so that you do things, and what you wanted at a certain point isn't going to be the exact same as well, man. So I can resonate big time. And actually I listened to a podcast that was an Irish guy. What was his name again? He was on your podcast. He's a podcaster as well. He lives out in Bali.
Darren Lee.
I met him, and like I recognised his voice, and it was from your podcast. And he's sober as well, like teetotal, doesn't drink. And he said a similar thing about it. And I don't want anyone to listen to this podcast. I mean, you sitting here from like a high horse telling anyone to do it, but I now actually would encourage anyone to take a break, an extended period from it. It doesn't have to be 6 months. It doesn't have to be a year, even 30 days, because most people like haven't done that, and they don't realize, like, because I think a lot of people, I had this conversation with someone recently about it. It's like folk are always like, how do you feel? Like, unless you're a habitual user of excessive drinking, you're not actually going to feel that different. So folk are chasing this. I think someone actually replied to that post the other day and said to me, like, I've never thought about that. I've been sober for 18 months, and theirs was because theirs was like quite drastic and quite extreme, which is completely fair enough. No, I never took that. The things that you've spoke to me about, I never even thought about that you spoke about. And it's funny how like people don't like maybe acknowledge when they're winning or what they're actually benefiting from it. Do you know what I mean? So
completely agree. For me, it's time, money, calories. And that creativity aspect I would put under time, but also like mental bandwidth. Yeah. So everyone knows that feeling of a hangover. You just don't operate at the same level. You don't train as well. You don't make as good choices with your food. You definitely don't sleep as well. Anyone that's worn a Whoop band would have an absolute horrifying time when they see what happens when you have alcohol, even 1 or 2, which is crazy. And again, we're not coming on to demonize it, but I love having an element of control about my life. And there's been times in my life when I think that maybe that's been a negative thing, because I've been so controlled about my diet or so controlled about my training when I've been trying to get as lean as I can. And that can be a negative thing. But when I remove things that have a control over me, and alcohol's never been that for me, thankfully, but it can be a net negative. And I'm like, okay, well, if I withdraw this, whether it could be caffeine as well, it could be recreational drugs, it could be your phone use, it could be whatever it is. When you start to withdraw things and you understand how things can be when you've got no stimulus or no like little crutch that you're leaning on to like make life better or make life seem different, you really do start to understand what you're personally capable of, and also personally what you're thinking as well. Like, think about that time when you're in the shower. A lot of your good ideas will probably come then as well, because you've not got your phone in your hand, you've not got something that's taking you away from that present moment, and they're probably things that come up. I think, like, if you're talking about creativity within your business, having no time when you're either out your head on a stimulus or when you're struggling with the after effects of your hormones coming back down to earth after a stimulus, you quite often find that you're more level for a longer period, and that's when the mind starts to do its work and does really well. Equally, there'll be people listening to this that have come up with their best business ideas when they've been steaming drunk. They've been down the pub with their mate, been like, yeah, we'll start this bar, or we'll start this clothing brand, or we'll start this, and that's totally cool. But I know for me and for many people listening to this, you'll probably unlock greater realms of possibility when you withdraw some of the stimulus and give yourself a moment to sit peacefully.
Yeah, I think it's just in a lot of things you do. Like, I always take note of everything. Like, when I go abroad, I always take note of who I was. Let's say, for example, like most folk go on maybe an annual trip abroad, or they go once or twice. When you're on like a journey of development, you don't actually truly appreciate how much you've grown until you go into a similar environment that you've been in. And it's not even to do with alcohol, it's just other things you're maybe not actually acknowledging. It's like what you were speaking about, or I look at pictures sometimes, and I encourage my clients to do this, to go back and look at points in their life and look at videos, look at how you were speaking. Even when I was listening to the podcast from 2020, and it wasn't even just about how I was articulating myself or how I was speaking, I was thinking back to that moment in my time, in my life, like who I was, what I wanted, what I believed. And I think it's like with things like this, just people can be, when it comes to change, it's like they're looking at it the wrong way, and they're not actually looking at what could be, rather than what they're not going to feel. So it's like someone's like, yeah, exercise, or they're improving or taking on something that's like, yeah, but like I know that will happen, and they look at almost like the tip of the iceberg, and it's actually, no, you need to actually think about what will become as a result of you not doing this thing. And it's hard to see that because you don't know what you don't know. You know what I mean?
There's
like,
a ripple effect from a lot of our choices. Mm-hmm. Like the habits that we have now will largely be how we are in 2025, whether that's our physical appearance or our mental state. A lot of the things that we choose to do in June 2024 are going to have an impact down the line, whether that is the drink that we have, whether it is the exercise we do, whether that's the content we consume, whether that's the effort we put into our work, or whether that's the vehicle that we're working within. Mm-hmm. All these things will come down to pass in what turns out to be. Yeah,
100%. And there's a really good book called The Compound Effect, and it talks a lot about like compounding effects of things that you introduce in your life. And it uses a really good example and scenario of when you do like something and you do it over the course of a week, and you might not notice that in a week. Like, it's like if you had like two people and you were contending them, they're in the same world, same circumstances, same abilities, and they had the exact same start, but like one person read a page of a book every single day and the other person didn't. Let's say 10 pages, a bit more than one page, right? Now, over the course of the week, would there be a competitive advantage? No, but over the course of 52 weeks, every single time that person reads that book, it instigates a thought. It's that sort of theory of like the plane theory of the angle that it changes in. And it's like short term, people don't see the value in things. And it's the same. It's like if someone's maybe not at a point with like alcohol, but it's like, it's not problematic. Therefore, it's just human nature, isn't it? To wait until there's a problem and to wait until it's a need. Like, my back was really sore last year from training really heavily for years, and that's what it took me to start doing yoga and mobility. It took me to get a really bad back. Like, even though I knew, I was like, 29, man, this is getting quite sore here. Like, I need to do something about this. And everything's always from a place of pain. Do you know what I mean? Rather than like, actually, I was listening to your podcast before this as well on the way here about the 15 lessons from 250, and it was 3 things that, was it Dr. Aura, was it? Or have I got this? Ari?
Dr. Aria, yeah.
Aria. And it was basically saying the 3 things that human brains are programmed to feel is seek pleasure, avoid pain, and what was the other one? Can't remember exactly what they were.
Off the top of my head, can't remember, but that pain piece, as you say, is absolutely huge. Yeah. Like, your back built up to a point where you had to act.
Yeah.
In the same way, sometimes it can be better to be in a worse circumstance because it drives change faster. So when I was leaving the insurance industry, it took me a long, like 3 years probably, of like not being quite certain that I was feeling valued or working in the right area to move, because I was comfortably numb. But it came to a point where I saw what it could look like on the other side in terms of friends of mine that had moved into that industry and were doing significantly better financially that I felt I was capable of. Equally, you could be in a relationship that's just okay, but you stay in it because it's not painful enough to leave. Whereas if you were in a domestic abuse incident or they cheated on you, you'd be much more likely to make a change faster because the pain is such that you have to move away from. So as a human being, like you say, our brains, Dr. Ari would explain that we're driven to avoid pain, seek comfort, and seek sort of certainty as well, which is a big part of a lot of what we do too.
Yeah. So you touched base on like the first part, you obviously went into like sobriety, then you spoke about like balancing both parts, like kind of tying into what we were talking about there, both with the pain and that. Like you obviously said there, it's been something you've actually really enjoyed, and it's been like, it's almost been that sort of, you've loved the grind of doing it. What's been the sort of most painful parts in like pursuing it and actually getting to the point that it is? Because this is the reason why I'm talking about this. This isn't just for anyone that wants to start a podcast. It's for anyone that wants to achieve success in their life, and it's the same principles. It's actually going to a greater cause, and loads of folks see from the outside, episode 250, you articulating yourself really well, big guests on there, in Dubai podcasting, doing these different things, and it's like, you know, Colin's got his shit together here, and it's like they don't see the bit before. What was the sort of biggest pain that you went through, or challenges in building the podcast or pushing these different areas of your life?
Like you say, it's sometimes hard to realise what the hard periods are when you're in them. It's only when you reflect back you think, oh, that run of episodes was pretty tough because this one cancelled, this file corrupted, this one didn't do as many downloads as I hoped based on the effort that I put into in terms of travelling to a particular location or recording in a particular studio that had a particular fiscal cost to it. All these things add up. I think the early days are really easy because you're really excited. There's a mad stat that 80% of podcasts don't make it past episode 8, and then another 10% fall away before episode 21, because in those early days your why or your excitement or your enjoyment from it is enough to carry you through it. But then if you get to episode 21 and it's not really taken off in the way you hoped, or maybe guests are cancelling, or the ones that you've reached out to haven't booked in the way you wanted, or maybe the downloads haven't grown as much as you wanted, or maybe you've not found a sponsor that you've wanted to try and fiscally drive the thing, it's easy to fall away at that point because it's not as exciting, it's not as sexy, it's not new, it's not novel stimulus, and a lot of us crave novelty and trying to find something that gives us a buzz. There's like a bit of a grind period where the concept's there, but you haven't really proved a success yet, particularly if you haven't grown in the way that you wanted to. So in those early days where you're maybe a year into podcasting and it's not this behemoth that you wanted it to be, even though I definitely took an approach where I was willing to play the long game. I even am still willing to play the long game now. It's nowhere near where I think it could get to. And I'm not in a rush because I love having the conversations. So I'm falling back on things that I enjoy. But in terms of pain, when you maybe have times where you can't book in the guest that you've reached out to that you've always wanted to host, or you can't get the download figures that you may be hoping for, or YouTube is such a slow burn and you're wondering, like, what do I need to post there that'll get me to that position? But just going back to an understanding that I would continue to do this just because I enjoy it for forever, even if it never really changed massively, because one, the actual enjoyment of the conversations is great. I love prepping for them as well. I really learn a lot about my guests and their field of expertise, and it's made me somebody who's quite knowledgeable across a broad range of topics, at least ones that I care about anyway. I also think that the depth of feedback and support you get from a podcast audience is radically different. Bear in mind, I grew an Instagram following 2017, 2018 to like 10,000 followers pretty quickly, got the MyProtein sponsorship, got the Muscle Food sponsorship. That was cool. But you maybe would get a message like, looking sick, bro, fire emoji, or what's your chest routine, bro? That's very different to somebody who goes and listens to a number of your podcasts and says, oh, I learned this from Dr. Ari, or I learned this from Will Storr, or I learned this from Sahil Bloom, and you're thinking, wow, this is having a really positive ripple effect years after that episode came out. So the feedback loop is so much more powerful and it's so much more deep than the surface level stuff that I was doing before. So I guess in those periods of pain where maybe it's not growing as fast as you want, or maybe it's not getting to the levels that you are aspiring towards immediately, falling back on the why and the things you really enjoy about it have really counted for me. And people can apply that to any area of their life, certainly not just podcasting.
Yeah, it's the cliche thing. It's falling in love with the process, isn't it? It is actually the definition of it. And I remember actually having that conversation with you around our podcast, like actually discussing like just enjoying developing through other people. Like even from this conversation, like I take so much away. Like I think communication in itself is like a dying art, like people just talking, or even in this conversation right now, that we're making eye contact. That's like, people don't really do that, like stuff like this, and it puts you in such an advantageous position in other parts of your life by actually just getting comfortable being uncomfortable with it. Like, there was an element of me even at the start of this podcast where I haven't done another podcast. I've had other people doing podcasts, but I was like, Colin actually can articulate himself really well, like better than I can. Like that's just your skill. That's like what you do. Although I do that as well, and I was going, I felt uncomfortable, and I was like, good, I get to go and learn to be better. Yeah. Like I get to go and actually improve.
Exposure therapy is massive. And when it comes to confidence, I hosted a guy, it was years ago now, episode 40 something, Dr. I forget the guy's name. He's an American guy, but he's a confidence coach basically. And he was talking about how important it is to expose yourself to new situations. And like, everyone listening to this will have lifted weights at some point, probably, just based on the demographic that would listen to this. Think about the first time you went into the gym and you tried to squat the barbell. You're probably shaking like a shitting dog, and it was really, really difficult. That's the same as if you're somebody that's never gone up and talked to a girl in a bar, or who's never held a conversation with a colleague about something difficult that's gone wrong, or maybe they've talked to their manager about a promotion they're wanting to go for, or a wage rise they're asking for, or maybe they've had a difficult conversation with their partner where, I'm not really feeling that you're contributing to the relationship that you used to do, or maybe I think you've fallen off with your good habits that were really important at the start of our relationship. These things are all things that you can get experience of, and you become better each time. So in the same way with the squat, your reps get better over time. You can add weight, you can add load, you can have better conversations over time, you can have more precise conversations with your partners, with your friends, with your family, if you do them more often. Yeah,
I've got this like theory around like growing, and it's why people grow at the pace they do, and some people just accelerate. Because like, you ever seen Spider-Man where they talk about with great power comes great responsibility?
Uncle Ben, yeah,
Uncle Ben. And I was talking about this today as well, and it was basically like the full part of like when someone grows. So let's say, for example, someone's going through like a big health and fitness journey, they're improving themselves, they're developing. The reason why they're in that situation is typically to do with their environment and the people around them. So the reason why their rate of growth is going to be reflective of that environment. So as much as that person may want the result, it's usually going to be limited by those around them because of the beliefs that they've built up. And when someone goes through like rapid growth, what it begins to actually do, and probably why people actually don't want to grow as fast, is it shines a light on so many areas of their life they actually do need to change. I've always said this to Ailey and when we were working with Josh as well, and I was just basically mentoring a little bit on coaching. It's like when someone goes through a radical bit of growth and they're like accelerating their life. But I mean, you know, when someone goes from being like quite morbidly overweight and they've got really poor behaviours to all of a sudden they're like crushing it, but I mean like in a matter of months. I'm like, the thing you need to remember with that is they've still got it in them to be that person, like, and it's only fresh. Therefore you need to be conscious of the fact that like the bigger you are, the harder you fall. And if you go through like a period of rapid growth, and that's my full theory why people don't, like, you get some people that are like unicorns that are like, they go from this like dark place to like boom right away. But like, I think the reason why folk grow at the pace they grow is because they grow at the pace of the environment allows them to grow. And like, unless they're in an environment that's going to encourage that and be safe for them to do that, it's going to either like make them fall flat on their face, or it's going to make them limit their growth and slow them up or down as well.
Try to pull them back down as well. Like a number of guests have spoken about tall poppy syndrome.
Yeah.
And that's been Australian guests, it's been Irish guests, it's been Scottish guests. And it's very common if you become the tallest poppy in the field, sometimes those around you become quite uncomfortable and they want to cut you down, bring you back down to their level, drag you back down. Crabs in a bucket's the other phrase that people often think about as well. The crab's trying to climb out and get to freedom, but everyone around them's like, no, get back in here and pull them back down. So that could be you if you're somebody that's doing a sobriety journey or doing a fitness journey or doing a content creation journey or maybe starting a side hustle. People can get uncomfortable with the growth that you're looking to make. And you need to be really resolute during that period to understand that they're maybe not doing it from a hateful perspective, but they're doing it from you're making them uncomfortable. You said shining a light. Quite often the journey that you go on can shine a light on the inadequacies or the insecurities of others around you as well, and that can lead to a little bit of friction, it can lead to a little bit of conflict. So you have to be really strong at that period to understand that you need to keep going, you need to push through, because you'll also quite quickly build a new network of people who are more like you, or this new self that you're creating as well. And I think that's why coaching is so important. If you look at your cohort of clients that work with you, if somebody does go through a radical weight loss period and they've got all these new habits like going for a walk in the morning, weighing their food, training after work even if they're tired, not having the 10 pints in the kebab on a Saturday night, but instead maybe having a couple of gin and tonics and then going home, they're going to upset some of those people around them. So when they find other people who are also getting coached by you or also doing similar things, it becomes a lot more easy to see that as normal and to see that as the standard that you want to adhere to, and then stick to that yourself rather than feel like you have to fall back into old routines and old habits and old comfortable behaviours with those own same comfortable group of friends or family.
And it probably goes back to the part that you said about sobriety, like the decision fatigue and the fog. Like, it's not that you don't go into these environments anymore, but you are in them less. Like, you're not in those spaces anymore. Like, we, myself and Ailey have a coach for High Rocks at the moment, and he's actually a sobriety coach as well. It's actually just by chance. Like, I decided to do that literally the month we signed up working with John, and he was just he went through a big, he was like, had a really, really bad problem with like drug and alcohol. He was an addict, and his reason for changing was because it was going to literally ruin his life. But he was just saying, like, he just doesn't even put himself in environments like that. But like, I think that's what the part a lot when it comes to changing, a lot of people actually forget. Like, the thing that they want to actually learn how to navigate is the thing that they don't. It's not that they need to stop doing it, but they need to change how they do it. So let's see this full, like, especially with like development, it's like you can still do this and do this. The thing I always say to people is like, you will change, but you won't want to do that the same way you done it. Like, the thing that you actually think you value is actually the thing that you're going to actually realise that you don't actually value the way in which you do it. And it probably, like, you going being sober, so like just being in less situations. Like, have you experienced any of that sort of like tall poppy syndrome since you've went through like a good amount of growth, and how have you dealt with that?
I'm a little bit older now. You're 30 this year, Kristian?
I'm 30 now, 31 this year.
Yeah, cool. So I turned 32 in October. I definitely think in my younger self, I conformed way more. At university, even when I was kind of falling out of love with the drinking and partying scene, I was still going because that's what you do. That's what your friends are all doing. If you don't, you're going to be lonely. And one of my favourite ever podcast guests that I've had on, and one of my favourite ever podcasts that I listen to, Chris Williamson, who hosts Modern Wisdom, he talks about the loneliness chapter. Yeah. And that's when you're making the change from your current self towards this improved self that you're wanting to work towards. And there's a little bit of a tax and price that you pay during that period for who you're surrounded by, because you're not quite where you want to be the right guy to hang around with the new group, because they're maybe looking at you thinking, oh, you've got a lot of work to do before you can be in our group. But you're also trying to leave behind that old group that's trying to drag you back to those bad habits. So there's a little bit of a period where you almost need to prove yourself to be part of the new crowd or the new group or the new demographic that you're wanting to be part of in the environment. But you also best not turn back and go backwards, because to do that would have sacrificed everything you've done up until this point. So if I think back, there was definitely periods where I conformed a little bit too much. I was willing to be part of the crowd. But I've always been quite a strong character and quite disagreeable. I think it's quite a masculine trait. Whenever I've done like personality tests, whether that's been Understand Me by Jordan Peterson or whether that's been the DISC personality test, which is a Carl Jung test, I've always been quite disagreeable and willing to be seen as incorrect by numerous people, as long as I see that it's clear within my own value set and it's in alignment with who I am. So quite quickly, I have been able to attend lots of gatherings with the car, which is a game changer. If you're somebody that ever ditches your car, you're weak and you're easily persuaded. But I turn up and I have the car and I just say, no, I'm driving, I'm happy to. And a lot of people value the designated driver bit as well. Yeah. But I certainly think that when like tall poppy syndrome, you'll get messages from people who will say to you, you've changed. I'm not happy with the fact that you're not coming out with us anymore. Do you think you're too good for us? Oh, come on, just have a beer. Come on, just have a line. Whatever it is, that is really, really common. And yeah, I've had those conversations many times over, but a lot of those people either aren't part of my circle anymore, or they know that I'm just going to say no because I'm pretty resolute to my principles. I'm somebody that can be quite firm and not be swayed by pressure in a lot of occasions. Mm. And I've done so many reps and iterations of that now that I can be in the nightclub till 12 o'clock. I don't love nightclubs, but bars or whatever else as well are a lot easier because you can still have conversations, and then you get to a particular time in the night when the conversation starts to take a dive because they are so inebriated that it's going to fall off a cliff. But I go out loads. There is obviously certain environments you wouldn't want to be in. You don't want to be in a gaff at 3 a.m. and everyone's absolutely rattling and you're sitting there sober. That's not going to be a fun time. But I've gone to music events, I've gone to bars, I've gone to nightclubs, and I'm very comfortable in those environments because I'm very sure of myself now as well. And I think that comes with one, being clear on who I am and what I stand for, but also you have to become sure of yourself when you're sober. Some of the events you've probably gone to in the last few months, you would have maybe relied on having a beer in your hand and just that little bit of social lubrication. And that's why I'm not super anti-alcohol. I think it can really play a role when it comes to breaking down social barriers, and I've made lots of friends on drunken nights out or nights where I've been a little bit inebriated. But now I'm very, very sure of myself, and touch wood, I'm a decent conversationalist now through all the podcasting I've done, that I can have a good conversation with whoever up until a certain point.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things with it, isn't it? I definitely felt it at points when I went to things and I was like, oh, like, I can hold a good conversation and it doesn't define me, but like, it made me feel unsettled knowing that like I was like, this is like unventured territory here, man. Do you know what I mean? So, no, like, and that's it. You go through different points. So from the last time we spoke, and obviously from you chatting right now, people probably get the idea that, like, I know that when you were younger, you said you maybe conformed a little bit more, but you know, that sort of like being like sure of yourself, something that you've developed, but like being that sort of person that said no from a younger age, like where do you think that came from?
Probably my parents.
Yeah.
I think a lot of things come from our parents. My dad's very clear on what he likes in life in terms of his work. He's got a boat that he goes to every Saturday, and he's got like a fishing machine that he messes about with that he likes to use as an invention as an outlet. And that's not quote unquote normal, is it? A lot of dads are going to the football with their mates, or the rugby, which Dad took us to when my brother and I were kids as well. So having people around you that are very sure of yourself. But I also think the content that I've consumed has made me feel confident as well. And through creating on social media from 2017 onwards, I've actually built an incredible network of people who are quite like-minded. So by sharing content in a particular niche, at that time it was very much health and fitness, a little bit of mindset in there as well, you attract new members of your tribe that do similar things to you that seem normal. In the same way, we're seeing run clubs pop up at the moment, aren't we? Like everywhere. And I see some people poke fun at them, and if you want to do that, that's absolutely cool. I've not been to a run club, but I absolutely see the merit in them, because if you turn up and run a 5k on a Saturday or Sunday with all these different people that are also up for running a 5k, you might well find that there's other areas that you're interested in. You might well find that you're both interested in art or music or whatever else it is that has an overlap, and you build your friendships out, so you start to feel like you're in a group of people who are also not conforming to what the societal norm is. And I think a run club's a great vehicle for that. I think CrossFit classes or boxes are great. Boot camps like you used to run are a great vehicle for that as well. Good friend of myself and on the podcast MTN, David Hatt, runs his 12-week peak, and thousands of people that do that all become pals because they're all dieting for 12 weeks doing the same thing. In the same way, if you look at your cohort, if you run a program that's got a time limit on it, everyone's kind of pulling towards the same goal at the same time frame. And guess what? There'll be like people that have like talked in the group chat or met up outside of it, and they've become friends as well because there's like a shared purpose and goal. So in terms of me saying no, that's definitely possible, but you also need to find stuff to say yes to, and people that you want to do new things or new fun experiences with too. Yeah,
it's one of the biggest things that we 7 success foundations in the program, and one of them's excitement. And I'll say, like, your life's by design. You need to manufacture things in your life. And I see when someone says you need to have fun in your life, that's a bit like, what do you mean fun? But like, I'll say to people, like, encourage people to meet up, get workouts in, catch up with each other, go to different spaces and environments that's going to stimulate them and make them have that wee feeling of, I think this kind of goes back to the point of, sometimes people don't want to admit that certain things make them feel uncomfortable. So it's almost like that's a sign of weakness. Like, they don't want to admit that going to a different gym actually makes them feel uncomfortable. They don't want to admit that turning up to a run club and not knowing anyone, they're almost kind of like, yeah, do you know what I mean, peacocking a bit, like, yeah, it doesn't really affect me, like, or
they just never do it, Kristian.
Yeah, I know, just never ever do it, put it off. And I think I can totally relate to that point, like, your tribe's everything. And that was a big turning point for me, even through the lockdown. Like, I always talk about how the podcast for me was the vehicle to meeting more people, to building more connections, which then it's that like aeroplane theory again. It's like, it just points you, gets you thinking. And it's funny, like, you don't even realise through a conversation the things that you take up. I think it's interesting how different people learn. Like, I don't really need to be told. I learn through like observing. Like, and it's not even like observing like the learning itself. It's like, I can be in a room, let's say for example, I was in a room with you, someone else in like a different world, in like another podcast or whatever, and I was just tuning into your conversation. I'm also assessing how you look, how you carry yourself, what you say. And I'm not just looking at someone going, oh, they're ripped, they're jacked. But like, the way that I look at someone is like, that's the back. They only borrow your physique, you only borrow your fitness. And then I'm not literally sitting thinking, right, these people have, like, this is reputable to me. And then I start listening to the way what they're saying, what they're doing, what they accept, what they tolerate, what they don't. And that's enough for me. Like, I know that's not for everyone, but like, just being around people, and I'm genuinely doing that, folk that I look up to. I remember last year when we done when I done the Keltman last year, and I had my old coach Joe Parrish came up, I had my best mate Lewis McFarlane came up, and my best mate Grant Munn came up, and my family were there. It was like my people there, it was like my tribe was there. And after that weekend, obviously myself, Joe and Lewis were all coaches, and my mate Grant isn't a coach. And then he came up, and around that time, off the back end of it, he then actually started, like, he was like, mate, I need to step up my life. He's like, I need to really step up. He's like, I want to get a coach. And I actually recommended a list of people, ended up working with that person, and he literally went through like a mad transformation, mad change, and it's actually instigated more change. He actually gave up his job, he lives in Australia now, and that came, like, not just that solely, but I know that was a massive thing in that weekend for just being around us.
He looked around and saw people that were doing things that were more aligned with who they are, like you, Lewis, Joe, very much living existences that are on a path that you've moved towards and stayed on and pushed on.
Yeah.
So if he was saying that, he's thinking, if they can have that, why can't I? Yeah. And it might not be the same domain. They might not want to be an online fitness coach or doing incredible challenges like the Keltman, but his version of that is more aligned to who Grant wants to be rather than who Grant was maybe trying to be at that point.
Yeah, you'll be buzzing listening to this. But yeah, no, like, and I know it wasn't just solely that. I don't want it. I know I need to. I'm not just taking.
There's always I think like I often say that fitness is the pebble at the top of the avalanche.
Yeah. Or
it's the gateway drug to self-development.
Yeah.
But if you think about events like that, that can just be somewhere on that avalanche journey or somewhere on that ladder that somebody's climbing as a rung that gives them the stepping stone to what they want to get towards. And all the different little moments, whether it's a podcast you listen to or a YouTube video you watch or a conversation you have with friends or an event that you go to, they all are adding up to shape what's going to come next. Yeah. Now you can drown those out and ignore those, or you can sometimes zoom out, you can journal, which I'm a big fan of, or you can meditate on it and start to think about what do these things point towards that I should maybe be considering, or you can just ignore them and carry on down the autopilot life, which is something that I rally against really strongly. Yeah. Just talking does it. It's cathartic, isn't it? Talking. Just speaking about things. Like, I seen it was actually a Chris Williamson video. It was like 90% of your problems can be fixed by a workout, talking, and it was something else. It was literally just good night's sleep.
Yeah, good night's sleep.
Walk,
it was literally like those three things. I actually bumped into Chris Williamson last year in Dubai. I saw the photo. Yeah, and I bumped into him, and I'd just seen that you had been at like an event, and I actually went by him. I was pure starstruck, man. Like I was. It's funny, like, don't even know the guy. Like, it's funny how you build. You've listened to a lot of his content though, so you build a mad connection. Like, I had somebody say hello in the gym the other day, and it's really cool. They feel like they really know me because they've listened to hours of Cambro. And he was like, oh, and you spoke to this guy and said this, and I was like, that's so cool that you've taken it's mental, something from it. And I think he'd just done the live show with James Smith in Dubai. He'd been in Manchester the week before when I saw him as well, which was really cool. I got a wee catch up with him, which is class. I said that to him. I was like, do you know Colin? It's the first thing you think of when you connector, isn't it? I know, it's funny, isn't it? It's funny how mad connected you can be through people consuming your content. I had this thing a while ago, and it was my mentor Chris said it to me, and he was like, basically, can someone binge you? Can someone actually binge you? Like, for anyone that's in like a world where you're like selling a service or whatever, and it's funny, like, you have certain things that someone says and they don't even mean it, like that's the big purpose of a talk, but like that one thing, and I was like, yeah. And I was talking to someone recently, and they were saying, you ever heard of the 7-hour rule? I was like, no. And it's like 7 hours of consuming your content, and someone will want to work with you, buy from you, or try and connect with you in some way, shape or form. 7 hours. So if you're doing that with 30-second reels on Instagram, it's taking a very, very long time, and a lot of that, if you've got a podcast or a YouTube or a longer form content, that's going to happen an awful lot faster. And that's why even guys that don't have podcasts, I've had guests on that are absolutely prolific. They get interviewed every couple of weeks and just create content because yes, they have the long form that they create off the back of that, and their audience go and listen to that, and they connect with them, and they decide whether they're going to work with them or buy from them or whatever else as well. But obviously they strip that content down into clips for their Instagram and their social media as well. So it's a great vehicle for that, and I love that 7-hour rule. Yeah. Who's your main source of content? What do you like consuming? I like Modern Wisdom. I always have.
OG listener, 2018 I think I started listening to that, so to see it become the beam it has now is amazing. I dip in and out of Rogan depending on who the guest is. I think he's up there with the best podcaster because he's been doing it so long, and the quality of guest that he gets on as well is really good. I watch a little bit of Ali Abdaal, who's kind of more productivity in that space. Who else do I listen to a lot of? I listen to a lot of Heart and Hand, which is a Rangers podcast, because that's my kind of fun that I switch off. I mean, it's not been fun this season, but we can skip that part. But I have obviously content that I take really seriously, and then I have content that I use to switch off from the self-development world as well. I also listen to hours of podcasts every week for prep for my guests. So I listen to so many different shows and so many different hosts, depending on if that guest's been on. So I interviewed Daniel Priestley when I was in Dubai. It was a great capture, a great win for the podcast at the time. I listened to like 6 different shows to prep for that, and I read like 3 of his books because I needed to be on the money and I wanted to ask him good questions. And because of that and the approach that I take to other guests that I'm having on, I'm listening to a whole host of shows on a regular basis. So I've got my traditional ones that I go to and I absolutely love, ones like Chris Williamson, Modern Wisdom, friend of the podcast and uses this studio, David McIntosh, Development with David's done a fantastic job there. Fergus Crawley, who you know as well, Modern Mind. Again, Fergus and I share a lot of guests back and forth as well. But then I've got all these other podcasts that I just happen to tap into because whoever I'm coming up to interview, they've been on their shows as well, which is quite cool.
Yeah. Do you think there's such a thing as too much personal development?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's intellectual masturbation.
Yeah, it's a thing, isn't it?
So you could sit and listen and consume and consume and consume. But one of my old hashtags, and I think you asked me about this the last episode we did, I used to always put hashtag take action on all my Instagram posts when they were like grid photos back in the day when Instagram actually rewarded that. Now it doesn't. And I really believe that you're much better off. For example, you get people who flex online that have read 52 books this year. I've read a book a week. And I'm like, okay, cool. I would love to ask you to tell me one actionable thing from all 52. Give me that now. And if they can't do that, I'm like, okay, well, you've intellectually masturbated and just read lots of books you've just consumed. Whereas I read, but I don't read as voraciously as that. I don't consume as much as that. But guess what? Ask me about Atomic Habits and I can tell you back to front what I've done around environment design, what I've done about the triggers in my environment, what I've done about my thought processes in terms of how I trigger my habits, what friction I've removed or what friction I've added, and all these different things that have come into that. And I would much rather be somebody who is quite expert at understanding and then actioning a book than somebody that's just read and read and read. So from that perspective, yeah, you can definitely have too much self-development in terms of consumption. In terms of actual too much self-development as a person, it depends on what you're working towards. But I think we are progressive beings in that we can really value working towards something at all times, whether that's a personal development goal, whether that's a fitness goal, whether that's a mindset goal, whether that's a financial goal. It's important to always move the goalposts a little bit, while of course pausing to reflect and enjoy where we've got to this point in time. Like you were talking about the journey you've been on since we last recorded. Like fiscally, it'll have totally changed. Mentally, it'll have totally changed. Physically, you've achieved a lot of amazing events during that time as well. You should probably be continuing to set something else. I'm sure there's a High Rocks goal coming up based on the fact you've got a High Rocks coach, but making sure that at different points when you hit those milestones that you previously told you would make you happy, make sure that you pause and you think, oh, that was really cool. I'm glad that happened. Let's pause. And then of course you stop and you go again.
It's funny, like that's the one thing that I've actually became, like I did actually experience it a bit through High Rocks training for the first time ever. I started not running my own race because I've been doing so many things over the years that I've not been trying to win. Like, and I'm not trying to win overall at High Rocks, so I'm trying to go really high level as much as I can, and I actually started realising that I was just being like outrageously competitive, but to the point that I was a beginner, like technically speaking. And that's what I think for a lot of people, they struggle with that part about the process, which me and you have been talking about a lot. And I can really take note of that because I remember when I was going to therapy a few years ago and I was training for an Ironman at the time. And the therapist was like saying, like, you shouldn't anticipate how you feel. And I was like, well, one of the biggest drivers was like I got what you meant. Like, I totally did get what you mean. You shouldn't like be like, I should feel this way. The biggest driver for me when I do things is like, I want to experience what it feels like to do that. And it's not that like, I think that's really important to check in with that and separate that, because when it comes to like body, whatever the thing is, sometimes folk are like, you should focus on the process and not get too caught up in the goal. But like you should as well. Like, you should actually like you should be thinking about how it's going to feel, not just about the validation you're going to get when you do it. Because every time I've done anything that's requires so much work and so much effort, it's like it's really good to get to that point and actually just be in it and be like, I've done that.
Pause. I think the pause matters.
Yeah.
And marking the occasion can be really helpful as well.
Yeah.
Now, I am not hugely materialistic. There's certain things that I've bought and I've enjoyed, but I quite like to assign those to like a milestone that I've hit, so I can look at the watch or the car or the thing that I bought for the apartment that relates to a particular time or milestone that I achieved. And I also like to have particular evenings or days out, not necessarily, almost never drinking, but are related to like, 200 episodes, I went for a cigar with my friends at the Dakota. 250, I was sat in Dubai at a nice restaurant. I was like, I'll always remember that I went to Ling Ling when I hit 250 episodes, won't I? Because that's what I characterised it as. And it let me pause, because I think the kind of people that particularly listen to my podcast in terms of a self-development podcast, they are always striving for the next thing. They're always chasing the next thing. And I believe, and Tony Robbins said it, although David Hatt regularly tries to claim credit on the podcast, progress is happiness. And it really is. We want to be working towards something. We are beings that like to strive, that like to have effort. And dopamine is the progress hormone. It's not the achievement hormone. So enjoy the journey, of course, but then have that little pause, embrace all the feelings that come with it, sit in the moment, feel great, smile, share it with a loved one, share it with a friend. And then, of course, we go charging on to the next thing, don't we?
Yeah, I think that kind of really, it probably ties into the part you said about the masturbation of, what was it?
Intellectual masturbation.
Intellectual masturbation, like, because you probably get that feeling when you do that, because you can actually tie why you feel a certain way. And I see that the other end of that, like, because the reason why I asked, because obviously as a content creator, like, there'll probably be some people you maybe even speak to, fans of that you actually, and they're avid listeners, like, absolutely love it. And it's like, it's not saying that everyone needs to be absolutely like sending it with it, but like, you might be like, you should do something with this, like, because it's actually you're
my
actually
favourite messages, Kristian, by an absolute mile, are when somebody says, I listened to this episode and I did this. So I listened to Frankie Lee and I decided to start gratitude journaling and start to map out during the week, am I happy with the career path that I'm on or the business that I'm trying to grow? Because he talked a lot about having your ladder up against the wrong wall. So sometimes we shoot for particular goals. So you mentioned High Rocks. I am completely convinced, knowing you over the last few years, that you're doing High Rocks for the right intentions. You're doing it because it's a new physical challenge, it's a new stimulus, it's great. A lot of people at the moment are doing High Rocks because they think it would be great to get a photo for their Instagram run across the finish line. And they're chasing something that is not going to fulfill them in the way that they think it is. In the same way, I've worked with many people in the sales world who have thought they want to do sales because, he's got a nice car and he's got a nice watch and he does sales. Okay, cool. Well, it's not really about that. That's a byproduct of the process that I've followed up until this point to achieve the fiscal income that I've got. Equally, you get somebody who wants to, like bodybuilding shows, that was huge, pre-High Rocks. So many girls that maybe trained for a year or 2 years suddenly end up doing bikini competitions and developing all the different challenges that come with that. And very few have stuck it out off the back of that. At the start of lockdown, we joked about this. How many people started a podcast? How many of them are still standing? Almost fucking none of them. Right, crazy, so they were doing it for the wrong reasons, they were doing it for the wrong intentions, and they were putting the ladder up against the wrong wall. So my favourite messages by a mile are when somebody messages and talking about an episode they listened to or a collection of episodes they listened to, and the actions and the behaviours that have come off the back of that as well, because that feels like you've had a really positive effect by platforming somebody who's much cleverer than me probably, or much more expert than me, and they've brought value to my audience that have then gone on to make change in their life in the right direction.
I think I've sent you a message like that before where I've done this because of that. I always like telling folk, well, like, something's really good.
That's a great value to have.
Like, I like telling folk when something's really good. I'm like, I need to let someone know, like, when something's really good, and I think that's a good thing to do.
It's a great trait. It's probably why we're closer, because you've told me something that's meant something to you, and it's meant something to me at that moment too. I think I was saying this to, who was I talking to about this today? I can't even remember. I was talk to. I've had so many conversations today, and I was basically talking about, like, when I worked in the gym, I used to always like tell someone if they were really making a load of progress, because I worked in a gym and there was like 6,000 members. There was, of course, not 6,000 people that went there, right? But it would surprise you that out of that busy gym, that there was actually a select few people actually making the progress that they desired. And that isn't me shitting on anyone. That's just fitness. It's just because a lot of folk are
throwing a lot of stuff at a wall and hoping it sticks. But I always remember, like, anytime I seen like maybe a young guy going for a bit of a bro phase and you see them slapping on a bit of muscle, like, I'd be like, go and tell them. Or seeing a girl just like going from maybe like being the typical stereotypical class goer to then actually venture into an area and seeing them actually lose a bit of weight, looking very empowered,
doing their squats, doing their hip thrusts, and changing their shape.
Yeah, I tell them. But like, I actually was talking about it today. It's really surprising that, like, out of, you go to a really active gym, it's very little how many people you actually see doing it. More common now, depending on the gym you go to. I mean, if you went to Extreme Gym in Glasgow, that you went to a while ago, you see a lot of people in there, because not everyone, but the lion's share of people versus a commercial facility in Southeast Ayrshire, like, it's going to be totally different. Or a council gym, like, obviously the different demographics they go to there and stuff. But actually was thinking about it, it is actually pretty startling for an area that is just designed to drive performance and progress, that the numbers aren't actually, if you went, I don't know if there's someone
as a percentage,
it's not actually that much. And it just shows you that a lot of people are putting energy into areas that they're maybe not getting the return. And I'm all for it. You need to fall flat on your face a few times and make mistakes. That was me for years, you know what I mean? But I was actually thinking about it this morning, saying it's actually a small amount of people that are actually making the progress that they're satisfied with. It's crazy.
And that's why I'm a huge advocate of people getting a 12-week coaching block or a 16-week coaching block, and you put yourself ahead of 90%, maybe more, of gym goers, because you actually arm yourself with tools that will actually make a change in terms of training and nutrition. Because so many people go in and do the same thing they've done for 5-10 plus years. And I find that, like you were mentioning there, Extreme 2, for example, it's a bit of an outlier, but I'm a member of David Lloyd. But if I go back to the Nuffield that I was a member at in 2017, all the people in there look the same as they did when I was training there, whereas I've made notable changes to my body and my physique over that time, and I've had different phases of bulk and cut and photo shooting, strength and whatever else as well, but they all predominantly all look the same, or if anything just a little bit older and a little bit softer, because they haven't fundamentally tapped into the knowledge and the understanding that they needed to unlock what was beyond that.
Yeah, the potential there. Something that always really stood out, and it's something I'm a huge advocate of. I always talk about doing what you said you would do, personal responsibility, but I always remember that was one of the things, like, it's a big value, is personal responsibility, taking action. For someone that's maybe that's not really heard that, like, why would you stress the importance of personal responsibility in your life when it comes to making progress? Like, why would you, if you were to sell someone a sales pitch of like why is it so important, and why is it so important to you? Like, how could you sell that to them?
I'm going to try and answer this in a roundabout way, because you told me before that you used to smoke.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So the reason, or one of the reasons that you will no longer smoke, is because you had an identity change. You changed from a smoker to a non-smoker. This is again from Atomic Habits by James Clear, and anyone that listens to my podcast will be shaking their head because they've heard me say it so many times. But you fundamentally changed your identity to becoming a non-smoker. So your habits became in line with that new identity. Your behaviours, your routines, your habits, who you were as a person fundamentally changed. In the same way, if I said to somebody who was attempting to quit smoking and they said to me, oh, I'm trying to quit, they've not made that jump yet. They might still say yes to the cigarette in the smoking area at the pub at 9 o'clock after they've had a few pints, because their inhibitions are down, they're feeling weaker. Whereas if somebody says straight away, no, I don't smoke, I'm not a smoker, they've lived by that. So they've taken personal responsibility to reform who they are and what they stand for at that moment in time. So I'm a big believer when it comes to personal responsibility. Create your identity and who you want to look like and be like first, and then think about from there, work back, what does that person do? What do they look like? How do they behave? How do they spend their time? How do they talk to themselves? What does that all look like? And you can map this out. You can be as airy-fairy as you want and have a vision board or whatever else. I like pen and paper. I'm a big fan of it. Or have a note in your iPhone, or a lot of people now have that screensaver where they've got all the different things that they're looking to work towards, and that's great and that's cool if it helps you. But when you start to see what those look like, you're going to need to fall back on discipline. You're going to need to fall back on environment design. You're going to need to fall back on personal responsibility and clarity to adhere to all these different things that you start to map out as a person and individual. And first and foremost, having personal responsibility is going to allow you to say that you want these things and then try and work towards those in the most strict possible sense. And nothing feels better than doing the things you said you were going to do, and nothing feels worse than there being a gap or a delta or a gaping hole between the person that you're attempting to be and the person that you actually are at this moment in time. We all know those people that tell you with the best of intentions on the 1st of January every year, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, I'm going to earn this amount, I'm going to lose this amount of weight. And then guess what? By March, they're in the same position or worse, spinning their wheels because they haven't acted in alignment with the kind of person that was going to achieve those things. And they haven't been personally responsible for their inputs and they haven't been personally responsible for their outcomes.
Yeah, great answer. When I was in Ibiza the other week, it was coming to the end of the 6 months sober that I said I was going to do. And there was a part of me, man, like, and I remember actually, I can't remember who it was, and I'd seen them, and they were basically doing like a sober stint, and it was a coach, I can't remember, and they basically like never done it. Like they done it. It was like a few months they done it. They'd never done what they set out to do, which is fine. They didn't do it from a problematic state. But I remember there was like, look, these things happen. You do this, and I completely got that. And I remember like there was a part of me going, right, we just booked the trip. Like we were like, we need to get on a wee trip away because we actually haven't had any time off this year. We just came back from the retreat. And I was like, oh, that was a holiday. I was like, I technically was fucking working, like very on it for the full week. And I was like, I haven't had any time off this year. A big push, pure justifying that I need to take time off. And we went away, and I was like, right, I'm going to the White Island, man. I'm going to Ibiza. We're just going for 3 nights. And there was a part of me going, I'm not going to say I'm going to have a beer, but I'm also not going to say I'm not going to have a beer, because I'm not going to go away. I don't intend to get pure drunk. And I was talking to a few clients about it, and I was actually like talking about it very logically, like I was saying there. And then I went away, and I was actually saying, Ailey, would you mind if I had a beer on this on the first day? She went, would you mind? And I was just like, yeah, I would mind, because I said
there's a David Goggins concept called the accountability mirror.
Yeah.
And Ailey's just been your mirror there by bouncing back the question. And that's great to recognise that you would have minded because you would have fallen short of the aspirations that you set yourself. And that's painful. When you aren't the man that you said you were going to be, that's why I think we've got quite a big crisis of masculinity and male mental health at the moment, because there's such a gap between what men would kind of like to be and what they feel like they're living like just now. Yeah,
aspirational and core, isn't it? They like the idea of doing it, but then living it. And see, at the time of that, it was like, it sounds like pure hardship. I'm on holiday having a nice time, but I remember actually having this like, sort of like, I haven't had this feeling since like for years, like this feeling of feeling quite out of depth, like, but I want to do that. Like I haven't, that sort of like toys out the pram sort of way, like sort of like, and I haven't had that feeling in like a long time. And I remember actually just being like, okay, like why am I even doing this? Then the next day I was like, well, this is who I am, it's what I do. And I came back, and I just after that I felt, but I had this night where I actually felt a bit like that. But then the next day I felt so fucking empowered from it, man, because I just stuck to my words. And I came back, and I'm like, and I know that's like I was hardly going to go bananas, but like we were sitting in this amazing point, and I like having a spontaneous beer. We'd been out a run, we came back in, and I was like, this is beautiful here. I'd actually really enjoy that right now. And it's made me realise that's what I do value, that part of it. But at the same time, I actually just was like, it made me, I felt at the time I actually had this feeling of like sulkiness, and I can relate to a lot of folk that I work with that are maybe kind of really just with their nutrition, they're at that point where they just want to just actually eat some junk. And I'm not saying you can't eat junk or eat processed foods, but like they have that choice to make that decision. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be the person that's, you're trying to shape your life like that, live your life by design, or do you want to live your life by default? Because it's, I mean, that's it. It's the worst promises to break are the ones with yourself, aren't they? The ones that you know, and that's different to different folk. Like, I mean,
it'll tear you apart though.
Yeah. I think when you're, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. I said it earlier, but when you are someone that is sure of yourself, you are someone, you've got this like really clear on what you want, you're very concise, good standard of health and fitness. The territory that comes with that is that you've got a higher standard to live up to that you've set for yourself. And that means that there's going to be times where you do have to do a lot of things that you don't want to do, and you still have to turn up and do that. So it's like
of course, but if you want extraordinary results, you must do extraordinary things to some extent. You must do things that are not normal for a considered period of time over and over and over again until they become relatively normal to you. So for example, there'll be people listening to this that have never gone for a walk in the morning, but there'll be people from this who go walk in the morning when the weather's nice, and then there'll be people listening to this that go walk hail, rain or shine, because that's just who they are. And there's varying degrees there of how strict somebody is with themselves and what they expect from themselves. But the person that's doing things that are the hardest, and I'm not saying going for a walk in the rain is hard, but it's pick your version. They're the people that will ultimately probably have the slightly different results or the slightly harder mindset to do hard things that might transfer over into the next thing that comes up for them. Because I certainly know that a lot of the things that I do in my day to day are preparing me to be resilient for unforeseen circumstances. So for example, I will make the hard choice as much as possible within the realms of possibility, so that when a choice comes up that I don't really have a choice in and they're both hard options, I'm kind of able to deal with it on a better basis.
Yeah, I've always had this sort of like theory that like if I was dropped somewhere, like I could survive. I could.
Well, you
look
spent
after
time in the military.
Yeah, but like if I was somewhere, like I could. I was in the Air Force though, man. But like I've always had this like sort of need to be like self-sufficient. Like I feel like it's like something like if I don't feel that way, I almost feel compromised. Like I'm like, oh, I feel a bit on edge. But yeah,
a lot of people that are really into health and fitness are not control freaks, but err towards the side of liking control.
Yeah.
Like the sobriety thing for me is a big thing. I like control. I like to be able to leave the venue when I want to. I like to be able to leave my own car. I like to feel sharp and articulate and not influenced by something else. So
yeah,
that's a big part of that.
Yeah. I suppose it's like things that you value sometimes compromise other things that you value, don't they? Like I'm very loyal, but like sometimes that can compromise other parts because I'm sometimes like I should be making steps or moving on to the next thing when I'm just like
being more cutthroat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like being like not even I'm quite cutthroat. Like I'm quite like honest and stuff, but like just certain things that I'll probably sometimes like I'll just not like I'll know, but like when there's an emotional attachment there, like I'll try and like I'm looking for ways to make things work, but not in a way that I'm being like trying to bend over backwards for something, because I'm looking for a solution. And then also like there'll also be that element of caring in it as well. Like I will make this work because I'll do what I said I was going to do and I'll see it out. And it's like there's a part of you that kind of knows that the easier way would be not doing it or actually just cutting that away. But like it's like I'm cutthroat in ways, but then also like that loyalty. I'm so honest. Like I'm so honest. Like, but to the point where I'm candid honest. Like I'm not like honest with clients like I have been in the past, where I've been a bit more like I need to be like hard on this person. My hard on people is like, you don't need to do that. Like you're a big boy, you're a big girl, like you don't need to do it. Like I think that approach works for like now.
The carrot and the stick can be better for different people.
Yeah, different people. You don't need to do it, man. And then like but some people do need the wee bit up the arse as well, man, don't they?
Of course, yeah. And we spoke before we hit record about sometimes getting to the end of your potential with something and not knowing when to quit. Loyalty is maybe a trait with that as well. So like I'm going to be loyal to pursue this particular area or this particular goal, and then at that point it becomes an actual depreciating activity because you're just spending so much time on something that's only marginally going to improve at all or not at all. Yeah,
and to give some insight to that point, because it's actually super relevant to so many folk, is that let's say for example someone's at a point where they're starting like a side hustle and then they're pushing that, and then they're also doing this thing and they're also trying to push areas of life like their performance and their health, but they don't actually realise that they've actually created a glass ceiling for themselves. That's so common now because folk are like, don't like this job, I'm going to start this thing. But then also pursuing other areas, it starts actually taking a hit. So the thing that they actually really value, the progress, goes down, and then they're up in this trap, but they keep telling themselves once they get to here, but they've not actually put down any numbers or said when it's going to be or what it's going to look like. They're almost kind of at this point of like, it will hopefully figure itself out and I will be at this point. And that's like indecisiveness, isn't it? It's like, I'm going to take that action in this area of my life, but then you're not actually taking full responsibility of like, you need to let go of that thing as well. Do you know what I mean?
Of course,
like,
yeah. And we talked about process orientated goals and behaviours. That's a big part, but you also need to know what your North Star or your end point is. And that's why it was probably helpful for you to have a 6-month sobriety goal.
Yeah. Because
when you hit that, you could feel a sense of achievement. You've completely rewired your thought process and decision making around alcohol as well, so you'll probably have a different experience now in terms of when you choose to drink, when not to, but you hit the milestone, so at least now you can be like, breathe. I've managed to achieve that. Whereas as you say, somebody might be pursuing a particular side hustle or a particular job or a particular vocation, and they're just going and going and going and not knowing what good looks like or what great looks like or what achievement looks like. And it's important to have some milestones along the way to recognize that this has been quote unquote a success, or it's been you've had some level of attainment.
100%. Again, man, it's funny, like that lesson that I was telling you about what happened in Ibiza was something that I was like, I've already learned the lessons from this full thing. Like if it's 2 weeks out, if I drink it's cool, if I don't it's not. But then by actually overcoming that point, I've learned an even bigger lesson. It's just funny that you're always just learning, going
always
through
a white belt,
just always going through and always learning. So to round things off, because I know we've been chatting for a while now, man. One of the biggest questions I actually spoke to you about before. So you said about prepping an actual answer, because I didn't share. Like, actually, I've went off piece here. I've just been talking. Like, I kind of been asking some questions that I had, but obviously you've had a lot of guests on the podcast. I know you've had 253 episodes. I know not every single one of them. You've had some solo episodes and stuff in there. Out of all the guests, who's been the biggest influence on you, and why?
I think different people have been an influence on me at different times, because you'll see a lot with my content. There'll be periods where I go through a sprint of fiscal episodes about business and investing, and then there'll be a sprint where I'm going through more mindfulness or spiritual episodes, and then there'll be ones where I'm going through more health or body episodes. And so at different times there's been people where I look back and I think, wow, that was so powerful, like I really learned a lot from that. But I think if I was to zoom out and think, I was sat in this chair, and you mentioned him already, Dr. Arya was somebody that's incredibly spiritual and incredibly profound. He'd gone through 2 significant periods of hardship. One of them we spoke about in the podcast, one of them he wasn't ready to speak about, but he could tell you the lessons from it. And he spoke a lot about detaching from the emotions that you have. So for example, a lot of people will say, I have depression. He would say, no, you're having depressive thoughts, or you're having a depressive period. You're not your emotions, you're not depression. And extrapolating down from that, he spoke a lot about when the stimulus comes, so whatever that is, whether that's an external stimulus or an internal stimulus within you, when that comes, create a gap between your response to it. So for example, Kristian, one of your clients phones up and says, I'm quitting the program, I've hated it, give me a refund. Your stimulus it's pretty aggressive. It's not a nice experience, is it? But you have a gap to choose how you respond to that. You could respond in the same level, in the same energy, and be, no, fuck you, like, this is ridiculous, why are you doing that? Or you could be calm, you could be measured, you could say, okay, I'm sorry to hear that, can I understand a bit more about that, why? Or you could say, okay, no problem at all, let's cut ties, here's your refund, and you do it from a stoic perspective. There's lots of different options when the stimulus comes in. In the same way, I could get an email from a client that says, yes, Colin, we'd like to go ahead with the order for 300 mattresses and 200 desk chairs. Here's your purchase order. I could be elated and be like, amazing, brilliant, hit the roof. That's going to hit my target for this month. It's going to hit my target for next month, whatever it is. Or I could pause and think, okay, what are the next steps? How can I enjoy this, but also make sure that it moves forward at the right pace? We've always got a choice. So Aria was really, really helpful for me to think about how much I am in control of the reaction to the stimuluses that come in. I'm a pretty calm person overall, but of course there's flashes of anger, of course there's flashes of energy or excitement, but trying to remain quite level, and I think it's quite a stoic principle as well, to what comes in, create some sort of gap, some sort of space for myself to process it, and then choose how I respond. That's not perfect. Of course I've seen a message or an email or a phone call where I've been like effing and blinding afterwards and thinking, what the fuck, that's outrageous. But when I get the moment and the time to employ my strategies, which is to breathe, which is to write, which is to journal, which is to step outside and walk, that whole Chris Williamson clip, a walk or a workout can have or a good night's sleep can have a wonderful impact on your ability to process a situation and choose how you respond thereafter. So that stands out for me as one of the lessons, but it's so hard to pick them, Kristian. As you saw, I did 15 for episode 250. I think I've got like another 25 that are written down formally that I've not shared yet with the world.
Yeah, I think it's a big one, because we are so reactive now. Like we're almost in this like pressure cooker that's like contracted. Like just like, see, when I see someone that's got road rage, I'm like, I don't even want to know what's happening in their life, because that's you just seeing the gasket going, letting off.
You spoke about what was your friend called that moved to Australia? Grant, cool. So Grant had a lot of different experiences that were building up to the time he went to watch you at the Kelman. Guess what? That was the event that was pushing him towards making change, or it was one of the events that pushed him towards. In the same way, you see the guy with road rage flying off the handle. Maybe his wife had texted him that morning saying, oh, I can't believe you didn't do the dishes after you made the kids breakfast, you're a piece of shit. Or, I'm not coming home tonight, I'm going out with the girls, make your own dinner. And he's thinking, oh, can't believe she's done that to me. And then someone's cut him up and he's decided to fly off the handle. there's so many other things that are going on behind the scenes, as you say, that build up to the moments that we see visibly.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's a hard thing to do, to take yourself out of these situations. And I shared this recently about like successful people, because that's what this full podcast is about, is like success, developing it, pushing it, applying it in your own areas. And it's like the big misconception a lot of people have when it comes to successful people is that they don't have the challenge, or their challenges in some way, different shape or form. The biggest thing I've found, and it's like in my world, is like I still get like I'm like, when does this end? It never gets easier. You just get better at tolerating and recognizing, and almost like, imagine it's like challenges like frequency, so how often it happens, and in the intensity at which it happens, you're able to essentially reduce how long the frequency is. So that it happens, depending on how intense it is going to impact how you feel to it. So based on your day, let's say for example, I've had a day where, I don't know, I've had a few challenging clients. Ailey's been challenging. I've like pure putting the blame on other people. But let's say, set the example there. I've not been that well. I couldn't do my session I wanted to do, and I've been going towards an event or something. Everything that's almost kind of aligning. I'm starting to feel very frustrated. And then that thing happens that if I wasn't in that state, I wouldn't react in that way, but I react in that way. I have that moment, and then I'm able to actually decipher it after that and do that. It's a very hard thing to do. And depending on how severe it is and how intense it is and what state you are in is going to dictate how long it does that. But I watch people, like something happens that to me is very, what's the word, minutiae, like very like, it's not even that much of a thing.
Small.
And you see someone else, it's a devastating factor in the week, and they hang on to it. And it actually is like, this week's been a write-off. And you're like, see, anyone that uses language like that, by the way, the week's been a write-off, it's usually for something pure stupid. You know what I mean? Your week can't be a write-off. Like, you can't.
There's still, like, for me, there's so many things I fall back on. Like, I call them like keystone habits that I will just do regardless of mood, regardless of tiredness, regardless of energy, regardless of time that's available to me. Non-negotiables we spoke about the last time when we spoke back in 2020. They still sit there, and they're like the backbone that allow me to function. And if people quote unquote say their week's been a write-off, or this has just thrown me, okay, but there's still certain things that you could just need to tick the boxes on, do the things, and guess what, you'll probably put yourself in a better position down the line to deal with issues like that. Yeah,
100%. It's just, and it's time, isn't it? And I think that's the thing. It's like a lot of people see people on the outside and they don't see the stuff actually. I heard something recently, it was actually on a Chris Williamson podcast, and it was on also Diary of a CEO, and it was in fact, I can't remember what one it was anyway. I think they both had the same guest, and it was an ex-CIA agent. He was talking about your public life, your private life, and your secret life. And it was basically, the public life is like the persona that you see, that you push out there, the identity that you create for yourself. Private's maybe family, friends. Secret is like the narrative in your head, how you speak to yourself, the comparison you're putting yourself through. For some people, very, very serious. For some people, not that secretive. And it's like when you go through these different phases, it's almost, this is your secret life you're working on. And that's something when I coach people, is like, I'm almost trying to get from the get-go, is like, I don't care who they are or what they do. I'm almost trying to break down those barriers to understand them, break down, everyone has vices, everyone has coping mechanisms. And I think a lot of people, when they're talking to someone, it's almost like they're trying to put on the public life, and it's like, you wouldn't be in the frustrated position that you were in if you didn't have the problems you're maybe not acknowledging. And it's trying to get folk to kind of unpack that wee bit and build that up, because I think that secret life's a very good way to break it down to folk, and then they're kind of like, I know what you're talking about, because everyone has a secret life.
Yeah, of course they do. The talk that goes on inside your head is secret to everyone apart from you.
Yeah, and it's like, I think a lot of people just they think that someone that's doing better than them doesn't have a secret life. They think it's like they don't have an inner dialogue and an inner monologue going on that's like, they've fixed their default settings, they don't have challenge anymore, they don't have any trauma, they don't deal with that. And it's like, no, they actually are just able to navigate it a little bit more, manage it and regulate it, like cope with it in a way that's allowing them to operate in the way that they do, that you're maybe not able to do. And I think for a lot of people, it's like, sometimes you can look in the surface and be like, why can't I do that? Like, why can't I do that? And it's like, because of where you're at right now, and it'll fix itself. It will, if you keep trying.
Everyone's got different capacities. Like, the broadest shoulders carry the heaviest load, and I'm always trying to build my shoulders to be as broad as possible to carry the load that I'm capable of, but also those around me that I choose to let put the heaviness on me as well. And there was a clip from Lex Friedman when he interviewed Elon Musk, and you were saying about there, people look from the outside and they don't understand what somebody's secret life looks like. He was like, what's it like being Elon Musk? Like, a lot of people would love to be like trying to launch rockets to Mars or grow Tesla to whatever many £billion business it is. And he was like, my mind is a storm. So Elon Musk, could you imagine lying in bed at night as Elon Musk with all the different permutations and things that he's working on? But from the outside in, you might be like, oh, I'd love to be like own X and own Tesla and trying to create the next civilization on Mars. Like all these huge lofty goals that a lot of people aspire towards. And I'm sure he's got an amazing car or whatever else as well, right? But you wouldn't actually want his problems. In the same way, there's probably people that are like, oh, amazing how fast Kristian's grown his business and the mentorship stuff he's done and the holidays and the events that he has. But there'll be times where the burden that you're carrying is something that some of the people who want those things wouldn't be able to handle and would have like buckled under at that point in time. And that's why a lot of the things that we come to achieve and come to get are what we're capable of at that moment in time, behind closed doors as well as publicly facing. Yeah,
I said something recently. It was like, do you deserve it? Do you actually deserve it? And it's not just in a way that do you deserve it, but like how you speak to yourself, the work that you do, how you articulate yourself. I think the biggest one is how you speak to yourself internally. Like, do you deserve the thing that you want for how you speak to yourself? Because how you speak to yourself is what shapes your world. Like what you ruminate, do you just constantly ruminate problems, or do you actually say what you're going to do? Do you come up with ideas? A lot of folk are like, oh, I do this, but I can't do this, I can't do that. And it's like, you've got like, the average person has 60,000 thoughts a day. They're not all going to be positive, but is the lion's share of them moving you forward or pulling you down? And that's, I think, that thing you said about with the doctors, I'm not trying to be therapist here, that ties into like cognitive behaviour therapy. That's, you're trying to change your behaviour. Like, well, that's what CBT is, isn't it? You're trying to stop change because the way that the cycle that you're in is just keeping you fixated on that point. So
exactly, you might have really bad reactions to particular stimulus. You need to retrain yourself to deal with that stimulus in a different way so that you frame it differently or then act differently down the line too.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. When sometimes I'm explaining to folk when it comes to change, doing things, and it's not, you're not trying to make it overcomplicated, but you're almost trying to say to the person, it's a little bit more complex than you think it is. Like the thing that you can't even see is the thing that you need to work on, which is like folk are like, oh, brilliant, like fantastic, I'll go and work in that. But it's like just doing the work, taking action is going to be the thing that's going to do that, man. But mate, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's been an awesome conversation. I could just keep this going and go down a million different rabbit holes, but where could the audience find you in case they don't follow you? Find your podcast, if you want to plug anything away.
Sounds good to me, Kristian. Yeah, if you've enjoyed this, then there's lots more episodes you can go and listen to with myself talking and some really wise people talking as well, and it's Campbell Conversations. YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you find your podcasts. And if you are on Instagram, then I'm call.cambro, and I'd love to hear if you enjoyed this episode with Kristian and I.
Awesome. Thanks very much, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Awesome, man.